The attic smelled of dust and rot, thick enough to taste. Sunlight streamed through the cracked window, catching in the floating motes like tiny ghosts. My foot nudged something hard and I froze. An old suitcase lay in the corner, leather cracked, edges fraying. Nothing remarkable, yet the air around it felt wrong. A soft scratching echoed from within. I paused, holding my breath, heart hammering. Maybe a rat, I thought. But the sound was deliberate, like nails scraping against the inside. My fingers itched with curiosity, then a whisper, impossibly faint, cut through the quiet. "You shouldn't touch it," I jerked back. The voice, thin, ragged, almost pleading, came from the suitcase itself. No one else was in the attic. Only the beam of light, the dust, and the suitcase that seemed to pulse with something alive. I wanted to run, to slam the attic door and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. But I couldn't. The suitcase shifted slightly on its own, the corner lifting like it had a spine. Something inside moved and I could feel its gaze, though I knew it had no eyes. I froze, unable to look away. And then, just as the whisper grew into a hiss, a single word filled the air, a word that would not leave my mind. Open. The attic fell silent again, but the unease lingered, thick and suffocating. And I knew somehow that the real horror was waiting inside that suitcase, ready for me. The suitcase stayed in the corner, silent now, but its presence was a weight I could not shake. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. After all, it was just an old suitcase, dusty, forgotten, left behind in this crumbling house that had belonged to my late uncle. But the way it seemed to hum with life, the faint indentation in the leather that looked almost like a handprint, made my stomach twist. The attic was small and narrow, the floorboards groaning under each step. Sunlight fell in jagged stripes through the cracks in the boards, casting long, irregular shadows that seemed to twitch at the edges of my vision. The air smelled of old wood, mothballs, and something more subtle, something sour and metallic that made me wrinkle my nose. I crouched beside the suitcase, my hand hovering above the latch. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet curiosity pressed forward, relentless. That's when I heard it again, scratching, faint, deliberate. It wasn't just inside the suitcase now. It was inside the walls, in the floor beneath me, in the attic itself. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The sound of it startled me, harsh in the quiet space. Silence answered. Only the light moved, shifting as if in response, and the suitcase sat there, patient. I took a deep breath and backed away, wiping sweat from my brow. That's when I noticed the journal lying at the foot of the suitcase. I had not seen it before, its cover stained and brittle, edges curling like the pages had been gnawed by time itself. The title was smudged, illegible, but something compelled me to pick it up. A voice broke the silence, sharp, brittle, almost like the whisper from the suitcase, yet human. Some things were never meant to be found. I spun around. An elderly man stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane, his eyes sharp and wary despite the tremor in his hands. He looked like he had been expecting me all along. I didn't see you there," I stammered. His gaze flicked to the suitcase, then back to me. "You shouldn't touch it," he said, voice low, almost a growl. It watches, and it waits, for the foolish. For the curious." I tried to laugh it off, a hollow sound. "It's just an old suitcase, really. Curiosity kills more than cats," he interrupted, his voice snapping like dry wood. He turned and shuffled down the narrow stairs, leaving the words hanging in the air. The quiet returned, but heavier now, oppressive. I sank onto the floor, journal in hand. The cover felt unnaturally cold against my palms, though the attic itself was warm. Dust rose in the shafts of light with every breath I took, floating lazily, catching on the edges of my vision. I opened the journal, flipping carefully through pages yellowed and brittle. Odd sketches littered the margins, lines twisting into shapes that seemed vaguely human, yet wrong. Faces contorted in ways that should have been impossible, hands stretching too long, eyes staring in directions no eye should. One entry caught my attention. The handwriting was frantic, almost trembling. "They are patient. They wait for the one who opens it." I thought I could hide it. I thought I could leave it alone. But it remembers. It always remembers. I felt a chill that went deeper than the attic's draft. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. What?" I whispered. The words sounded ridiculous even to me. A sudden thump against the attic wall made me jump. My pulse spiked. The suitcase shifted, as if nudged by an unseen hand. I froze, my eyes fixed on the latch. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but something darker, stronger, held me there. I thought about leaving, taking the journal with me and locking the attic door forever. But the old man's words rang in my ears. It watches, and it waits for the foolish, for the curious. I glanced around the attic, noting the small details that made my skin crawl. A chair overturned as if someone had left in a hurry. Cobwebs strung from the rafters, but one line in particular hung lower, brushing against the suitcase's side, quivering as though disturbed. The air seemed to thicken with each breath. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching and writhing along the walls. Then faintly, I heard it again, the scratching. Not from the floorboards, not from the walls, from the suitcase itself. And a whisper, nearly impossible to distinguish, so quiet it could have been my own imagination. Open. I dropped the journal. My hands shook, my chest tightening. The suitcase's latch gleamed faintly in the dim light, beckoning, daring. I could step back, walk away, pretend I hadn't heard anything. But something told me that once curiosity passed, once the chance was missed, I might never get another. I stared. It waited. I waited. And for the first time, I wondered if curiosity wasn't the danger, but the suitcase itself. The attic grew colder. The shadows moved, and deep inside, something stirred. The night after my encounter in the attic, I couldn't sleep. The suitcase, closed now, sat in the corner of my rented room, harmless in appearance, yet alive in memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the latch move, ever so slightly, as if it were breathing. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that the scraping, whispering sounds had been a trick of the old house settling. But deep down, I knew better. I went back to the journal I had picked up in the attic. The pages were brittle, the ink faded to a sepia tone, but the words were legible. Handwriting shifted erratically between entries, some neat and deliberate, others jagged, frantic. Every page seemed to pulse with unease. It remembers. It waits. I thought I could leave it, but it will not forgive curiosity. The words clawed at my thoughts, repeating themselves even when I tried to read other entries. Sketches in the margins were worse. Faces that seemed human at first glance twisted into something unnatural. Hands stretched impossibly long, clawing at air. Eyes followed me from the page, unblinking, accusing. I began to notice small things around my apartment. The first night, a soft scratching on the floorboards beneath the suitcase. I told myself it was rodents. The next morning, a drawer in my bedroom slightly ajar, even though I had locked it. My keys, left on the counter, weren't where I'd placed them. Calm down, AJ, I muttered to myself. It's just nerves. You're tired. But the voice in my head sounded hollow, scared. My apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like an extension of the attic. Shadows pooled in corners, not quite static, edges shimmering as though they were alive. Then I started hearing the voices. Faint at first, unintelligible murmurs like whispers just out of earshot. Sometimes it sounded like someone calling my name. Other times, just low hissing, repeated over and over. Open it! Open it! I stopped telling anyone. Who would believe me? My friends laughed when I tried, calling it stress or imagination. My family shrugged. I couldn't explain that the suitcase wasn't just an object, but something with intent. That it seemed to judge, to wait, to remember every glance I gave it. The first stranger to notice something wrong was Mr. Fernandez, the elderly neighbor who had lived across the hall for decades. You shouldn't have brought it here, he said one afternoon as I descended the stairs with the suitcase. His voice trembled, yet there was authority behind it, as though speaking the truth carried weight. Things like that. They don't stay hidden. They find you no matter where you run. I don't understand, I said. It's just an old suitcase. I don't see what the problem is. You will, he replied, voice sharp and quick. Curiosity doesn't just kill, it changes you. Opens doors that should never be touched. I shook my head, ignoring the dread curling in my stomach. But the next few days proved him right. Micro-events began escalating, objects slightly out of place, shadows that lingered too long, scratches on walls that weren't there before. Once my mirror reflected the room perfectly, except for the suitcase. In its reflection, it wasn't closed. Its latch slowly creaked open as though sighing. I started documenting everything in the journal. It had become a ritual. Scribble my observations, noting every sound, every shift in the air. At first, I thought it would bring clarity. But clarity never came. Instead, the journal seemed to guide me, almost like a map I hadn't asked for. There was one entry that I couldn't ignore. I saw it move, though no one else was there. It followed me. I know it knows. I hear it whisper my name. Don't open it. Never open it. I realized the writer's handwriting matched the earlier entries in the attic journal. My uncle, my late uncle. He had written all of this before. Disappearing. The first real confrontation came when I left the suitcase in the kitchen while I showered. I returned to find the suitcase in the living room, its latch slightly open. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't even heard it shift. My pulse raced. I wanted to throw it away, burn it, lock it in a chest, but some part of me, some horrible, complicit curiosity, refused. Night after night, the whispers grew stronger. Sometimes they sounded like words, other times only unintelligible hisses. But there were nights when it was just the presence, thick, suffocating, crawling along my skin. My sleep became fragmented. I woke in cold sweats, convinced something had brushed my face while I slept. Once I saw a shadow detach from the corner of the room, move toward the suitcase and vanish. I knew I had to investigate. I returned to the attic, journal in hand, flashlight cutting through the dark. The air smelled sharper here, cleaner in some sense, but beneath it lingered the sour metallic stench that had haunted my memory. I spread the journal open on the floor, scanning pages, connecting dots. My uncle's entries were a roadmap. He had found the suitcase decades ago, in a relative's abandoned home. Inside, he wrote, was an object. He didn't specify what, that held something. Something he described as watchful, patient, and hungry for attention. The first warning sign had come soon after he brought it home. Small scratches on his furniture, things missing for hours, whispers that followed him everywhere. He wrote about paranoia, dread, and sleepless nights. Then the disappearance of his colleagues, friends, people he had invited into the house. Not violent deaths, just gone. And always a suitcase somewhere in the background, closed, innocuous, patient. I realized with a sinking horror that the suitcase didn't just wait, it remembered. It followed, it punished curiosity. My uncle had tried to hide it, thinking secrecy would save him. But the journal made it clear, secrecy is irrelevant. The suitcase finds the curious wherever they go. I began testing the theory. I left the suitcase locked in a closet for days. I stepped outside, avoided thinking about it. Still, I would hear faint scratches at night. Shadows moved around it. Once I saw a handprint in the dust, a fresh one, though no one had been near it. The paranoia became unbearable. I stopped answering my phone, stopped going out. Even when I ate, I felt watched. The whispers followed me from room to room. Sleep was impossible. I would doze for an hour, wake to find the suitcase inches closer than before. I started speaking to it. Not aloud, not really. My voice trembled even in thought. "What do you want?" I asked once late at night. For hours, nothing. Then, a soft, sibilant whisper, barely audible. "Open me. You know you will." I tried to resist. I tried everything. Locking it, moving it, ignoring it. But the suitcase is patient. It doesn't rush. It waits, always. And the more I resisted, the louder it became, the closer. The more deliberate its movements. Then came the neighbor's warnings. Mrs. Kapoor, who lived across the hall, knocked on my door one evening. "I know what's in there," she said, voice low, eyes darting around. "I've seen it before. Many years ago. People disappear when curiosity wins. Don't touch it. Don't open it. Please." I wanted to call her crazy, to dismiss it. But I had begun noticing the same things she hinted at. The subtle disturbances. The feeling of being watched. The air growing heavy, oppressive, whenever the suitcase was near. One night, the whispers changed. Clear words, deliberate, spoken as if from just behind my ear. "Ajay, open me, I've waited. Open me and see the truth." And I realized, this wasn't just curiosity or paranoia. This was a trap. The suitcase wanted me, not just to touch it, but to acknowledge it, to engage, to cross the line my uncle had crossed. I could feel my sanity fraying. Shadows didn't just move, they watched. Objects no longer stayed where I left them. Every creak, every whisper, every fleeting movement told me the suitcase was alive, aware, and patient beyond comprehension. And the journal? It was worse than a map. It was a lure. It guided me, hinted at secrets, whispered promises I didn't want to hear. And I realized with hollow dread that the suitcase had already won, in ways I didn't yet understand. By the end of the week, I was trembling, eyes darting to every corner, unable to sit still. The whispers had grown louder, almost coherent, almost pleading. And yet I knew that opening the suitcase was inevitable. I would do it, because the suitcase didn't just wait. It demanded acknowledgement, and in its patient, silent way, it was slowly breaking me. The suitcase had been silent for hours, or maybe days. Time had lost its meaning. The sun rose and fell outside my apartment window, but inside, shadows stretched and curled in impossible ways, longer than the walls themselves, twisting across the ceiling. I could feel them watching, waiting. Every breath I took was thick with unease, every heartbeat pounding like a drum announcing a predator's approach. I had tried everything to resist. Locked the suitcase, moved it into a storage closet, even fled the apartment for a night, staying at a cheap motel down the street. None of it mattered. Wherever I went, I could feel it following. The whispers had become voices, clear now, taunting, echoing through walls, floors, air itself. Open me. You know you want to, Ajay. I hadn't spoken in days except to myself, murmuring pleas, warnings, desperate questions I didn't dare answer. Finally, I found myself standing before it again, the suitcase placed in the center of the living room like a throne of dread. The room had begun to distort. The walls seemed too close, the ceiling sagging just enough to make me crouch instinctively. Time didn't make sense. The clock spun wildly, ticking forward and backward at once. My reflection in the mirror twisted grotesquely. I barely recognized my own eyes, wide with exhaustion and terror. The latch of the suitcase lifted slowly, of its own accord, without a sound. I froze, every nerve screaming, every instinct begging me to run. But curiosity, cursed curiosity, was stronger, and then it spoke. Ajay. Finally. The voice wasn't coming from the suitcase this time. It was everywhere. The walls, the floor, the air. Low and guttural at first, then rising into a shrill, mocking pitch. It mimicked my uncle's voice, my own voice. Whispers of neighbors, strangers. Dozens of voices layered together, screaming at once and yet perfectly coherent. Open it. See me? Know me? The suitcase trembled, leather wrinkling as though breathing. Shadows spilled out from beneath it, pooling across the floor like ink. I stumbled backward, but the room shifted with me. The door I had planned to flee through was gone, replaced by a wall that throbbed like living tissue. There is no escape, it hissed. Panic slammed into me, but I couldn't look away. The journal lay open on the floor, pages flipping violently as if caught in a storm. The words on the page were no longer ink. They glowed faintly, forming sentences I hadn't read before. The curious will join me. The patient will see all. There is no light. There is no leaving. Something brushed my leg. Not air, not a shadow. Cold, solid, yet fluid at the same time. I shrieked, scrambling backward, falling to the floor. The suitcase moved toward me, edges curling, leather wrinkling, seams stretching. It was alive. Not just alive, it was aware, intelligent, malevolent. Ajay. The sound was inside my head now, vibrating my skull. I clutched it, screaming, but no sound came out. My lungs burned, my heart throbbed. The room warped again. Familiar furniture contorted into alien shapes. The sofa stretched like a long, low beast, the lamp leaning toward me as if trying to whisper secrets I could not bear. I tried to move, tried to flee, but the shadows had taken shape. Hands, hundreds of them, clawing out of the darkness, grasping, pulling. Faces emerged from the shadows, distorted, screaming silently, eyes empty and accusing. Some bore the features of people I had seen before, the old neighbor, my uncle, even my own reflection twisted into something grotesque. Open me, Ajay, or join them. A flash of light, brilliant and cold, blinded me. When I could see again, the suitcase was open. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't moved it. And yet there it was, black interior yawning like the mouth of a predator. Something moving inside it, something alive. Something that shouldn't exist, I screamed. Backing into the wall, but the wall shifted. A figure emerged from the suitcase. Human-like yet wrong. Limbs bending at impossible angles, skin pale and stretched tight over visible ribs, eyes deep hollows of black. It mimicked my movements, mirrored my panic, yet its grin was too wide, knowing, patient. You've been curious? It whispered, voice 1,000 layered tones. Curiosity is payment. Curiosity is the door. I realized then that the suitcase had never contained an object. It had contained it, whatever it was. Patient, waiting, feeding on curiosity. Growing stronger each time someone looked, touched. or even thought about it. The journal spun off the floor, pages tearing violently, forming a whirlwind around me. The words formed a sentence I could barely comprehend. All who open are mine. All who see are lost. All who resist are broken. The shadows surged, and I felt my mind bending. I couldn't tell what was real. The apartment, my body, time itself, everything blurred into an endless, suffocating present. Whispers grew louder, screams layered over them. Faces I recognized, my uncle, the old neighbor, strangers, screamed silently, mouths opening impossibly wide, eyes black and empty. Ajay. Join us. Open, open, open. I tried to speak, but my voice shattered into fragments. I tried to move, but my body was no longer mine. The entity loomed closer, stretching, folding, grasping. I realized it didn't just watch. It consumed attention, awareness, even identity. It was inside me now, crawling through my nerves, whispering, teaching, mocking. A fleeting thought. Maybe this was the same fate my uncle had faced. Disappearance. Not death, but absorption. Existence folded into something monstrous, patient, infinite. I lunged forward, a final act of defiance or surrender. I couldn't tell which. My fingers brushed the edge of the suitcase. Leather cold and alive. And in that moment, the entity struck. My perception shattered. Reality folded. Time broke. I was everywhere and nowhere, watching myself from the corners of infinite rooms, hearing voices layer upon layer, seeing my own hands clawing at the air. You are mine. Screams erupted. Not mine, not theirs, but all at once. Walls pulsed, shadows expanded, and the entity filled every inch of my vision. And then, silence. Or perhaps it was never silence. Perhaps it was the quiet before the end. I collapsed to the floor. The suitcase stood open, empty now, or perhaps it had always been empty. Shadows receded, walls returned to their proper shape, clocks resumed ticking. The apartment seemed normal, too normal. The journal lay on the floor, pages blank. My hands shook violently. My chest ached. I could not breathe, but I knew in a way that would never leave me that the entity had not gone. It had simply waited, patient, inside the suitcase, inside the shadows, inside me. And if I ever looked away, even for a second, curiosity would whisper again. I tried to speak. Tried to tell someone, anyone. My voice came out in broken fragments. They're inside. No one could understand. No one would. And deep inside, I felt the entity smile, patient, watching, waiting. I understood finally, like my uncle, like countless others before him. Curiosity had been the key. Curiosity had been the payment. And the cost was everything. When I awoke, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears, suffocating in its stillness. Light from the morning filtered weakly through the blinds, dust motes drifting lazily in the shafts. But it felt wrong, too still, too clean. The suitcase sat in the center of the room, closed, innocuous, but I knew better. It had only paused. Patience was its nature. I moved carefully, every muscle taut, as though the slightest movement would awaken it. My hands trembled. My lungs burned from the night's exertion, though I could not even remember the passage of time. The apartment looked the same as it had when I first entered it days ago, yet something subtle had changed. Shadows lingered longer in corners. Air hummed with expectation. Even the sunlight seemed unwilling to fully enter the room, bending around the suitcase like a hesitant visitor. I approached it. Not to open it, God forbid, but because I needed to see it. To confront the object that had ruined my life. My fingers brushed the leather. Cold, smooth, unyielding. I pulled back sharply. The whispers were gone, but I could feel the awareness, the watching, inside the suitcase, inside me. I had survived, but I knew the survival came at a cost. Something inside me had shifted. The curiosity that had driven me to it had been paid for, and the payment was permanent. The whispers, the shadows, the movement. I could sense them even when I was outside on the street, among other people. They waited patiently. And I knew, beyond doubt, that they would always find me. Days passed. I left the apartment only when necessary, and even then, my steps were hesitant, my eyes scanning constantly. The neighbors noticed my silence, my gaunt appearance, but no one asked questions. Perhaps they knew, or perhaps no one truly wanted to know. There is a certain contagion in curiosity. A dangerous thread that once pulled unravels lives. I had seen it. I had felt it, at night, Sleep remained a stranger. I could lie in bed and feel shadows crawl along the walls, stretching impossibly long, brushing against my skin. I could hear whispers just beyond comprehension. Sometimes a phrase emerged, almost clear. "Come back. Open it." I would shiver, curl tighter under my blankets and try to shut it out. But the suitcase had taught me that resistance was temporary. Patience was eternal. I began documenting everything. Not in a journal, not in paper, not anywhere that could be read. I had learned the danger of leaving traces. Instead, I repeated the events silently to myself, over and over, a mental catalog of horror. Faces, sounds, shapes that had no right to exist. The stretching shadows, the whispered names of the lost. I could not erase them. They were etched into my mind, permanent, indelible. Months passed. Or maybe weeks. Time had no meaning anymore. I rarely left the apartment. The world outside seemed distant, unreal. The colors faded and muted compared to the sharp, oppressive clarity of the interior. The suitcase remained untouched. Yet I could feel it, like a heartbeat in the floorboards, in the air, in my chest. I knew it waited. And I knew that one day, curiosity, mine or another's, would tip the scale again. I heard from Mrs. Kapoor one evening. She knocked quietly, eyes wary, scanning the apartment before speaking. "You survived," she whispered, almost reverently. I think so," I replied, voice hoarse. Her eyes flicked toward the suitcase. I could feel her fear like a living thing. "Some of us aren't meant to escape entirely." "Not from that," she said softly. "Even when it's quiet, it's never gone. You carry a part of it now." "You know it," I nodded. The words felt useless. I already knew. The suitcase had marked me, patched into my consciousness. No distance, no doors, no walls could separate me from its presence. I was changed, hollowed, patiently waiting as it did. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the closed suitcase. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, curling toward it like tributaries. I could feel every hair on my arm standing on end. My reflection in the mirror no longer looked entirely human. The eyes were familiar, yes, but distant, haunted. Not fully mine anymore. A subtle creak sounded behind me. I whipped around. Nothing, just the air, vibrating. Then a faint whisper so soft I almost didn't catch it. "Soon." My heart hammered. I sank to the floor. I could not open it. I could not close my mind to it. I could only sit, watch, and wait. And the awareness lingered, just beneath perception, like a predator patiently observing, invisible yet omnipresent. I thought of my uncle, of the countless others before him. Their faces flashed in my mind, their terror, their silence, their eventual disappearance into the entity that lurked in that cursed suitcase. Some part of me wanted to scream, to warn others. But I knew the truth. No one could hear. No one could understand. And even if they could, the moment of curiosity would already have doomed them. I tried to imagine a life without it. Impossible. Shadows lingered in every corner of my vision. Whispers slithered into my thoughts. I could not escape, not physically, not mentally, not spiritually. The suitcase had claimed more than attention. It had claimed the way I perceived reality, fractured my trust in perception, planted seeds of paranoia and dread that would never leave. Weeks or months blurred into a distorted continuum of shadows and whispers. I had no sense of outside time, only the oppressive presence that never paused. Every small sound, a floorboard creak, a gust of wind, a distant car horn, felt like it carried the entity's intent, as if it had infiltrated the world outside my walls, seeping into the mundane, the ordinary. One evening, the whispers formed coherent words, almost a song. Curiosity paid, curiosity remains. Curiosity calls, curiosity claims. And I understood. This was the entity's essence. Not confined to the suitcase, not confined to the apartment. It lived in attention, in thought, in the act of looking, opening, remembering. I could never undo what I had done. I could never forget. I could never escape. I began to avoid mirrors. Shadows became unbearable. Every reflective surface seemed to contain eyes watching me, eyes that were mine and not mine simultaneously. Sleep was a memory. The apartment had become a theater of horror, and I was both audience and victim. Months later, though time no longer had meaning, I found myself at the suitcase again, closed, silent, innocuous, and yet I knew better. I could not touch it. I could not open it, and yet I could not stop seeing it. Every thought, every heartbeat, every blink of my eyes was measured against its awareness. It waited, patient, inevitable. I realized then that survival was hollow. Escape was impossible. I was forever tethered to it, carrying a fragment of the entity in my consciousness, a permanent link to something that should not exist. The suitcase was patient, and I was patient now. Hollowed, broken, aware, the last night I remember, or think I remember, I heard it clearly, unmistakably, almost gentle in tone. See? Curiosity always comes back, even when they think they have forgotten. I stared at the suitcase, and for the first time I did not feel fear. Only understanding, only resignation, only the quiet, suffocating knowledge that curiosity is inevitable and the entity will always wait. I do not open it. I do not touch it. I only wait. And somewhere, deep inside, I know that patience is only temporary. The suitcase sits there, unassuming, ordinary to any other eye. But I and I alone know the truth. Its horror is patient, its hunger eternal, and someday curiosity will return. Until then, I watch. I wait. And I remember, because once you have seen the real horror hidden inside an old suitcase, you never forget.